afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining another interview of Magnifying Our Impact. And today, I'm very privileged to have a great friend with me who has created, in my opinion, has created a profound change in so many people, particularly in the Asia region. But he's somebody that is truly inspiring for a number of different reasons for me. One being particularly that he has the ability to really understand the difficulties that we go through at an individual level in our lives, in the human condition, but also has the ability to be able to understand the macro shifts in our world and how he can create impact in many different forms, in many different ways, to be able to change so fast, you know, in very volatile situations. And so Michael is somebody who he's probably heard this a number of times before, and he's quite a humble person, so he's probably not great at listening to me embarrass him, but he truly is inspirational in the way that he works, but, you know, is very humble with it. And that to me is real, you know, quality leadership in the way that he leads other people. And the other thing that's coming to me as I introduce you, Michael, is your ability to be able to take so much stimulus from the outside world, so many difficult problems and challenges all at the same time, and to be able to hold that space, sit and ponder things. I remember one time where I was lucky enough to be invited to a dinner at one of your charities before, and the way in which you listened to the discussion and then was able to communicate so clearly with what needs to be done. So there's so many strings to this gentleman's bow as a leader, and it's a privilege to have him here with us this afternoon. So what I'd love to do is to introduce Michael Marett-Crosby, who runs a number of charities, particularly in the Asia region, that is focused on education, on the well-being and the safety of many refugees in the world in Asia. He's head of a child protection charity, and it's got such a fascinating background in the way in which he looks to help us all in the world. So with that introduction, Michael, it would be great for you, if you can, to just give us a potted history, and there's so much there, but if you could give us a couple of minutes on where your career has been, where you came from, and where you are today.
Thanks, Craig. It's a very humbling introduction for sure, and I hope I can live up to at least some of that. Craig, I wouldn't honestly say I've had a career in the sense of anything that particularly fits together, and I've been very fortunate, I think, in that way. I've done different things at different moments in my life. I trained as a Catholic priest. I was ordained as a Catholic priest. That didn't work out for all sorts of reasons. I worked in the prison service, and I loved that, and would possibly still be working in the prison service, which is a strange place to find fulfillment, but I definitely did. But for the accident of meeting people who genuinely are change makers in 2011, and being invited through actually chance encounters during a conference in Italy to become involved in Myanmar, Burma. I took on, over the years after that, the running of various charities in healthcare, education. I've become quite closely involved in child protection, simply because of the things I've seen in Southeast Asia. And yeah, I now look after a group of charities, some of them public, some of them more discrete entities that do some difficult things in healthcare, in education, in what might broadly be described as building of democracy and civil society, focused primarily on Myanmar, a country that's in the news almost always for the wrong reasons, but where encounters with people, Craig, you've had these experiences, I know, give one reasons to continue to hope.
And so, Michael, for me, it's profound to look at this nature-nurture debate as to where our qualities come from. And in essence, if you can just give me an idea of where your leadership came from, where you feel your skills came from, and what you dreamed about when you were younger. I mean, even before you were ordained, you know, as a child, what did you see in the world, and where did this need to serve and this need for compassion and contribution come from, do you think?
I think you're right to talk about a need to serve. I think there are mixed motives for all of us who become involved in caring professions. A degree of altruism, for sure, but also because it actually fulfills something personal inside oneself. As a young man, I was idealistic. I wanted to change the world. I was educated in many of the mores of Thatcher's Britain, and I found those unattractive. Still do, actually. I think, I mean, there are lots of moments I could pick on where I saw things and knew that they were wrong, and perhaps arrogantly, or perhaps because it's the only thing one can do, felt that I had to try and fix them. But I do go back to many of the experiences I had working in the prison service. In those years, it was felt to be a good thing politically to imprison young men. I think that was done, largely speaking, for reasons of electoral gain. It certainly wasn't done for the benefit of those young people who found themselves immured in prison, perhaps for good reasons, perhaps not, but certainly stripped of dignity, stripped of hope. In those places when young people have nothing, it's very easy for them to have recourse to violence and or despair. But it's also possible for young people in those spaces to start to construct a narrative of hope around themselves. And I think it was listening to those narratives of hope, listening to those dreams, that gave me the belief that by harnessing those hopes, by enabling those dreams to become true, not necessarily extravagantly, but at least in part, you could change those individuals' experiences and thereby change the worlds in which they live. Very often, those young men had absurd dreams. They wanted to become the partners of supermodels or Premier League footballers, and they weren't going to become any of those things. But by investing in that dream, you could start to build a future for those young people.
There's a number of people listening to this, I'm sure, that if you take the next generation or young people who are listening to this, who are either going through college, university, or just starting their careers, you know, I'm also fascinated in how you build teams, of course, and what you feel in 2020 is most important from a cultural perspective. Yeah. If you were to share what you feel is important for young people coming into the world of work or looking into international development right now to make a change, or indeed, you know, anybody that can see the challenges that face us right now and want to make a difference, what are your 2 or 3 pieces of advice that with people just starting off to look to make a difference right now? What do you feel that's imperative for them to focus on?
It's an interesting question, Craig. We've just been through a recruitment process in one of my charities, and because we're in lockdown at the moment, and this was a job that could be done from home by a young person, we were inundated with applications. Yes. And it was actually an experience impregnated with tragedy, because all of those young people were overqualified for the position and desperate for the position. And some of them even said they would do it for nothing because they wanted something at this moment of lockdown to take them out of themselves. One thing I look for is, and this may sound strange, is the belief that the individual can make a difference. If you look at how change happens in the world, it is usually when small groups of people make a decision to become that change. I'm not, when I look out at international development, hugely enamoured of the vast institutions, the big development agencies. They have a role, but I personally believe that small, single-purpose charities that are focused on doing one thing and doing it well, creating a small team of people with a common passion, is a better way of operating than through these inevitably cumbrous, inevitably self-absorbed, large development institutions. So I suppose what I was looking for in that round of employment, certainly, was somebody who believed that they themselves could make a difference. That's not arrogance. It's to have what St. Paul calls, he says, have no ambition except to do good. And that except to do good is really important. There's a mockery of religion which says have no ambition. That's disastrous. It's disastrous at every human level. But to have the ambition to do good is the first thing I look for. I think, secondly, I have to look for people who work hard.
Yes.
Again, sounds obvious, sounds easy. I think we have given the young people, certainly I meet, an education which gives them a strong sense of entitlement and maybe less sense that achievement has to be earned. So I do expect my staff to work hard, often to work long hours, to work across different time zones, to work as I've done all day today on a Sunday. All of those things are probably rather countercultural and no doubt break this, that and the other piece of legislation or whatever. I think if a small group of people are going to make a difference, you have to make sacrifices around time and engagement. And I think the third thing I have to look for is a willingness to understand difference. So I'm employing people in various countries to work for or in another country. And there has to be a willingness to embrace that difference. And that often means a willingness to read beyond the headlines.
And so you talked there about a number of different elements. One in particular was around cultural difference and obviously to work hard and have a willingness and intention to do good. When you look at your intention, I call it our emotional legacy. I love to ask audiences when they reach the end of their lives, when we reach the end of our lives and we're on our rocking chair and we look back, what has been our emotional legacy rather than just a physical or financial one? If you were to paint a picture of when you get to the end of your life and you look back, what will have been most important for you with regards to the change that you've made, do you feel?
If you work in the kind of places where my charities end up, Craig, you see some dreadful things. You see teenagers being pushed into the back of a van on the edge of a refugee camp, and you know that those teenagers will not be seen again. They will be fed into the international network of human trafficking. They may end up as forced brides, they may end up on factory ships. One doesn't know. And I've seen those things happening. I've seen the impotence of international agencies to stop those things from happening. I suppose my emotional legacy, certainly in the places in Southeast Asia where I work, would be a culture where such things cannot be tolerated, and where there are autochthonous, where there are national responses to those things that make it much harder for the people who profit from human trafficking, for example, to ply their trade. In the end, in international development, one is only a very small part of big issues. I'm not interested in the sort of obvious rewards. You don't make huge amounts of money in international development, but if you can become part of the change that enables a country like Myanmar, still struggling with a really complex colonial, post-colonial military legacy, to become its own future, to build that ability to respond fully to the needs it faces, then that is an emotional legacy. To have successors in that sense, Craig, to have people from Myanmar who take forward the work that we do so that we become unnecessary, that would be a great legacy.
And with regards to, you mentioned these difficulties that sometimes seem in certain areas seem entrenched in certain ways, and then, you know, something changes and there's then inspiration and hope and development and creation of a new way of thinking, a sense of democracy, and then there's steps back and then steps forward. You know, that there has always been, you know, large scale and small scale difficulties in these kind of environments. When you look at us sitting here from outside of these kind of environments, looking in, trying to understand how we can make a difference, what do you feel when you look at the biggest challenges on our planet? What do you think are the biggest problems, and how do you feel that individuals like myself and others that want to make a difference, what do you think is the biggest problem, and how do you think we can help to overcome it or manage it?
So I'm very suspicious of utopianism. The belief that every problem can be resolved by some single change normally leads to autocracy, leads to huge destruction. So one mustn't, I think, be naive about the extent of the challenge we face in international development. I think the biggest problem that I see in the future is the rebuilding of walls. Is that in the 1990s, for all sorts of reasons, we believed perhaps too easily, too smugly, that we were finding ways in which different cultures and communities could live together. We've learnt over the last 20-something years that it isn't nearly so easy. We all need a narrative of belonging, but when those narratives encourage us to build walls around ourselves in the belief that the other person is the risk to us, they become dangerous. In many ways, some middle-aged white guy like me going out to Asia to run charities feels a lot like a new form of colonialism, could feel a lot like a new form of Orientalism. But I actually think there is something important in trying to build connections between cultures and nations across thousands of miles at a time like this, because the easy narrative of the moment is to say solutions must all come from within and dangers all come from outside. If there is perhaps one benefit that might flow from the dreadful experience of COVID-19, and no benefit outweighs the loss of life and the suffering that there's been. We need to be really clear about that. But if there is one small benefit that can emerge from this, it is the realization that COVID-19 did not respect borders, did not respect walls. And however high those walls were, however much we reinforced ourselves around narratives of nationality, the virus came all the same. And that might indicate to us that the building of walls will not be sufficient, and that national identity, national narratives are valuable, but they are not ends in themselves.
No. So with that then, to me, that feels like we need to be inclusive as a global entity and learn, you know, our diversity and our multicultural approach needs to be grown and developed and be open. And of course, that comes with a real sense of love and respect and compassion and inclusivity between each other and understanding and connection. So there's so many values that underpin what you've just been sharing. So, you know, I'm trying to understand cultural diversity and trying to learn, you know, there's an enormous respect where I've been working a little bit more in West Africa between understanding that there's an exchange of wealth, that they can give me so much more that I can give them, but I have something to give them. but I need to learn from them first, and they need to learn from me. It's an exchange at a simple level.
Yeah.
What do you feel at a practical level? People who are wanting to make a difference, then what do you feel are the most important steps that we make to be able to start a project internationally, or be it building a school, or where do we start with this?
Craig, I'm no passionate believer in a kind of smug globalism, and I know you aren't either. There is not one solution that fits all. So I think the desire to fix something probably needs to start in the realization that the tools you need to do that job will be lying very close to the place you want to fix, or the people you want to fix. Those tools will be close at hand. They don't need to be necessarily the same as the way that problem has been fixed somewhere else. I am personally very sceptical of one-size-fits-all plans where you cross out one country and write the name of another and think you've achieved something. And there's a terrible weakness in international development that it tends to become homogenized. And that is, if that ever was a goal of international development, it certainly shouldn't be now. So if the tools are close at hand to a problem, then fixing it often becomes enabling those who are around that problem, who live with it, who found their own solutions, to make those solutions stick. Sometimes that is a question of exchange. You've used, I think, a really good word there, where the international partner can bring a certain expertise, a certain experience, a certain know-how, a certain perception into how the international world operates, such that the local solution can form part of the wider whole. There is then a lot of learning that needs to be done in the particular circumstances of that country and that people. The international development, if it's going to work, cannot be arrogant. And when it fails, which it does very often, it is because it carries with it the certainty that it brings solutions rather than brings that opportunity, as you've called it, for exchange.
Yeah.
So you find a problem, you recognize that there is some kind of local solution, inadequate it is maybe, that can then be grown into something that sticks.
Yeah.
That then forms a partnership between people on the ground who want to make the change and those from a wider community who want to enable that change. I think when you find that thing, that becomes what I called earlier your single purpose charity, if you like, your entity that is focused on that one thing alone. We recognize that that has a life. That project will have a beginning and a middle, and vitally, it will also have an end.
Yes.
A point at which the yous and the me's, as it were, in this exchange say, we're done.
Yes.
It now belongs to you. So the end game, the walking away, has to be integral into the structure of your entity. Again, it's why I personally like single-purpose charities with very clear goals.
Yes.
And when you deliver those goals, you're done.
Yes.
It's finished. And you move on and do something else.
Yes.
So that's by its nature a small group activity. It's also a deeply collaborative activity.
Yes.
And I personally think that's pretty much the only way that you get things done.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So you talked about a single entity and a small charity with a real clear focus.
Yeah.
Talk to me about culture within those teams, because there's many people, as I shared earlier, that are listening to this interview that are either starting from scratch and want to build an empowering winning culture, or they've been given an opportunity within an organization to lead other people forward and create a culture that might be slightly toxic at the moment or difficult at the moment, and they've been given a role to be able to give more clarity and purpose to an organization or a team. So just give us some advice, as if you're one of those people that is either building something from scratch and wants to help as a single purpose organization or a single purpose team, or secondly, you're being given the opportunity to join a team that is already working on something. What are the 2 or 3 things that are most important as a leader going into those environments that you think about to be able to build that structure?
That's a tough question, Craig, and I think if anybody asked me but you, what I'd do is I'd message you on WhatsApp and try and get the answer out of you. So I probably can't do that in these circumstances, but if I was going to phone a friend in that context, I've come to the work that I do through serendipity, I think, rather than an obvious career path. I'm not sure I really deserve to be doing what I do, and I certainly haven't come here through some kind of structured leadership program. So I've perhaps reflected much less than I should have done on what it is I do hour by hour. I think for me, to do what I do, I know I have to invest time in it. This job that I do cannot be done quickly, and it often isn't done easily. And if that means adapting my life so that I'm available at one end of the day to speak to Asia and at the other end of the day to speak to the West Coast of the US, that's what I have to do. Yeah. So no one should take this on if they want it to be easy. Secondly, I think one has to recognize, certainly in the world I live in, money is scarce, funds are scarce. If you are going to do something with someone else's money, which is what I've basically spent the last 10 years doing, you've got to make sure right from the beginning that there is someone in your team who is looking after the detail. I've been very fortunate in that for most of the last 10 years, I've worked with somebody who loves detail, who I think dreams about spreadsheets at night. I'm not that guy.
Me neither.
I know I don't dream about spreadsheets at night, but I work with someone who I think genuinely does, and who cares passionately to make sure that the pounds, shillings and pence match up at the end of the week. Yes. I suppose the broader point from that is that I could not do this job if everybody in my team was like me. And I have needed right from the beginning some people who complement the skills that I have, who make up my deficiencies. I only just can read a balance sheet, only just. So I know I need people around me who can do that. I am not somebody who has ever built anything with my hands. And as you know, because we share a friend in common in this regard, Craig, yes. I've worked for a long time with somebody who is passionately engaged in the physical, in the real world. You find those people through all sorts of accidents, certainly in my case. And maybe the key role I play is to hold those people together. They don't have to be friends. They very often aren't friends. My job is to be sufficiently enabling, but also forgiving, to help those people to work with each other.
Michael, you mentioned a number of elements just there, and you started with a sentiment that is just not true, which is the fact that you're not qualified, to be able to understand this. And I think just to say that I think, our education has been vitally important, I think, for both of us, and the unique privilege that we had to be able to experience that. But also, somebody said to me once, I think it was an Anthony Robbins program I went to many, many years ago. And I think, I can quote him by saying that school's okay, but you can't beat a great education. In other words, you've had so many extraordinary experiences that have shaped, the experiences that you have shaped you and conditioned you in a way that you can deal with so much and you can understand, have clarity in very complex environments. And I think that's your your massive strength in leadership is to understand how to take very complex situations and go through them and make them simple and inspire people around you. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do that you do very well. What I wanted to pinpoint on that and ask you my next question, which is, what do you think are the experiences, the most important experiences, the practical ones? Just give us an idea of what do you think are the 2 or 3 experiences that you've had in your life that have been most profound, that have got you to this place today? Because I think what I experience most in my life is that we obviously come to this world with 200,000 years of ecology and genetics, and then the environment shapes who we were born with, what we were born with. But I think then it's who we spend our time with, the environments we put ourselves within, that shape us. So what do you think, while you've been on this planet, what do you think are the 2 or 3 experiences that you've had that have been most profound to shape you to who you are today?
I'll pick 3, if I may, Craig. 2 come from the experience of working with people in prison. Very early on in that time, I was a chaplain at the time, and chaplains in those days, and possibly now, by law, had a key to every door in the building. That was required by law, that the chaplain had. There was nowhere a chaplain couldn't go. I found myself in a cell with a young man who had, I think, been found with drugs in the prison. And he'd just lost everything. Prison is a very graded structure. You build privilege through good behaviour. He'd, I think, previously had everything, and all of that had been taken away. And he was in a concrete box with cardboard furniture and a toilet in the corner. And I had, all the techniques, as it were, all the things I'd been taught disappear when you're faced with that. And all you're left with is 2 people. A young man with nothing and an older man who, although he's in uniform, in that moment has no power over him. And the only thing there was to do was to sit on the concrete floor with that boy and start to build back some kind of life. To listen to him and help him understand what is the first step you have to take to build something from nothing. Because that really was nothing in that concrete box. The second experience, that experience tells me that everybody can build a narrative of hope. Now, that can be founded on hatred. It can be founded as well on other more positive things. I don't know where that young man is now, but I never forget that experience of sitting with him and building a story of hope. The second experience, actually in the same prison, a busy day, I turned left rather than right on the wing. I can't remember what I did when I turned left. Had I turned right, I might have been able to stop someone I knew really well from taking his own life. And I didn't. I wasn't there at that moment in that young man's life, and he died. It was the terrible accident of which way you turn in a corridor. That stays with me because any kind of engagement in building other people's lives will involve profound failure. And you have to be able to live with that failure. And I think the third experience was in a conference centre in Italy, a beautiful location with some of the worst food I think I've ever had in the world. And sitting down over, and you wouldn't have thought it was possible in Italy to have bad pasta, but this place really excelled in bad pasta. School food, but in Italy. Sitting down with 2 people who I didn't know particularly well. One is an economist, the other a former member of a US administration. and realizing that the three of us, with our various strengths and weaknesses, made a whole. We made a complete set. There was experience, there was insight, there was different areas of expertise. And we kind of knew that if the three of us worked together, we could cover all the bases, and we still do. We're still co-trustees of a number of entities, and so the third experience is a very positive experience of knowing in the moment that these were people with whom, if I collaborated, we could together do something that none of us could do alone.
So with that, then I have two more quick questions for you, Michael, if I may. One is, with all of these experiences that you've just shared, which have been profound, they really have been, particularly for me, the first two, and I understand the strength of collaboration that you've shared there, but the first two stories seem to me very graphic lessons for me. One of my biggest learnings is who we spend our life with is who we become. In other words, who we surround ourselves with sometimes it's, you know, really shapes us. What we read, because words are hypnotic, and language is hypnotic on a page and create a sensory difference for us, but also the people that we share our lives with. So who are the two or three, if you're willing to, who are the two or three people, and they may be those ladies or gentlemen that you've just shared, but who are the two or three people that have most inspired you in your life? But more importantly, if I may, what was profound? What were the profound learnings? What was the key learnings that you had from these two or three people that have inspired you most in the world?
Wow. That's an unexpected question, Craig. Let me give you some rather probably shallow answers to it, because it's a good question. It needs careful thought. I have met on occasions people who have radiated a moral quality that has inspired me and others. One was the late Kofi Annan, who I didn't meet very often, but who I met in connection with his work in Rakhine State, and then again just before he died. And he had a quality that enabled people to work together through him that I profoundly admired. He was, in those moments at least, almost like a safe space in which enemies could connect, irreconcilable differences could start to look as if they could be fixed. He was the person who said to me, use education. That is the way to bring people together. And it was the last thing pretty much he said to me. That he remains an important person. In one of the most difficult periods in my life, after the first terrible months of the violence against the Rohingya, I had the opportunity to talk in private to Pope Francis. And this is not coming particularly from a faith position, but he was somebody who communicated to me a vision of what peace could look like. And at that moment, there was no peace in some dreadful conflicts, but also in my own life. And he helped me understand that walking away from Myanmar at that moment, which was profoundly tempting, many other people did it, would help nobody. And that by sticking with the mess, sticking with the chaos, sticking with the fear, I could become, in some very meager way, a means of building peace as well. He basically told me, don't stop, don't give up, don't give in to the powers of hatred and despair. And that was really, really important to me, Craig. I think the third person who, this is a small story in a way, but I remember meeting in Myanmar a gentleman who'd been, in many ways, the embodiment of the military rule that had so oppressed that country. He'd been a servant of the military state pretty much all his life. And we went out for a pizza for various complicated reasons that it takes too long to explain. And he said to me that he had, and I'll never forget this phrase, he said, "I have spent my life staring into my grave.
Oh, God.
And I am ashamed of what I have been." And you don't expect a senior retired civil servant to say something like that over a pizza.
No, you don't.
And he's actually become somebody who, in various very discreet ways, has profoundly helped us deliver change in particular in the healthcare sector. He would never want to be known for that. He would never, ever want his name associated with it. But he has been the facilitator of changes that have saved thousands of lives. And I suppose what I take from that is a belief that in the people we meet, whoever they might have been, there is someone they might still want to be.
Wow, that's a fantastic answer.
It was a terrible pizza
as
well.
Sorry?
Really bad. It was a terrible pizza as well.
It was terrible.
Yeah, terrible. Yeah. There's nowhere as bad as Southeast Asia for pizza.
Michael, I feel that, as you know, and I said this to you at the beginning of the interview, that I have many, many more questions that I could ask you, but I feel that that is an amazing lesson and learning and, so valuable for all of us listening to this to ponder on. There's been so many values, so much learning and understanding for me in the last 45 minutes. So I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
Always
so
a pleasure
much.
to talk to you, Craig.
There's so much there, and I think that's just a wonderful way for us to wrap up this interview. But thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much, Craig.
Thank you.